Transportation Health and Safety Association, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our next guest speaker. Professor Vic Pakalnis currently lectures at Queen's University on the subjects of mining and sustainability. He earned a bachelor's and master's of engineering degree in mining engineering from McGill University. He also obtained a master's of business administration from Queen's University. Previously to working at Queen's University, Mr. Pakalnis worked for the Ontario Ministry of Labour as a provincial director of mining and director of the industrial health and safety branches and regional director, Eastern Ontario, with corporate and program responsibilities for health and safety programs and employment standards. He was lead operations director for human resources and responsible for recruiting and training new inspectors. THSAO has a long-standing history with Vic. He was a distinguished and valuable member of our board of directors, and I can tell you firsthand he is an excellent champion and advocate of health and safety, and it's my pleasure today to be introducing Vic Pakalnis to talk about the business case for reducing MSDs.
So I'm the last speaker between you and lunch. So why did the chicken cross the road? A good trucker joke. Why did the chicken cross the road? To show the skunks it can be done. Northern Ontario joke. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've got a couple of props, which I'm going to put underneath here. The presentation, I've got copies of it, and I guess it's going to be posted as well. And I hope that you'll have a look at any slides that go by quickly. But I'm just going to give you a little bit of what I'm doing at Queen's in terms of context, and we're going to talk a bit about the management side of things, the business case question that came up in terms of how do we deal with the numbers. And I teach in the School of Engineering, but also lecture in the law faculty and also in the business faculty. I made the transition. This chicken crossed the road from 30 years in the Ministry of Labour over to the academic side, and it's quite a pleasure. And it's more of a pleasure to be here with my friends from the THSAO. Some of you I know we've seen at various mock trials. I was the judge usually in those, or various conferences, and thank you very much to my friends at the THSAO and my new friends Dee and others at the CRE-MSD organization. The three areas that we have to look at is the technology, and we heard about perhaps the influence of design on steps and trucks, and technology has a major impact on whether we're going to reduce any lost time injury rates or not. The legislation, we have perhaps the best legislation in the world, and it's all based on the internal responsibility system. We're going to be celebrating 30 years this province has had with this particular piece of legislation. In various other jurisdictions, you've got piles and piles of prescriptions and all kinds of chaos in terms of the kind of systems that they do have. I think we should be very proud of the system we have here in Ontario. And where it all started was where I started, in the mining industry. And we're going to see some of the dramatic effects on lost time injury rates, but I really do believe that part of the solution is in that area. The management systems, internal responsibility systems, how we are able to ensure that health and safety is considered a subject just as important as the financial side of things, the asset management, all of the various other things that you have to manage in an operation. I always give this slide in terms of what are the 10 top reasons of why you need to know how to manage occupational health and safety. Over the years, I've compiled the list, and number one, it comes out because it's the law. So don't, and I'm sure that Ann's going to talk more on that this afternoon in terms of the Act. But also important, a lot of those particular reasons relate to it makes good business sense. There is a business case that you can make for it. And you're going to have to learn some of the language in order to convince people that the investments are important. When you are making the decisions on buying one cab versus another cab, if there's a $200,000 or $500,000 difference in the price, can you justify it in terms of perhaps some of the lost time injury rates that will be avoided over the lifetime of that cab? That's the kind of argument that you're going to have to make. We heard that the numbers are staggering. From the Canadian point of view, $30 billion estimated in terms of direct and indirect. I think Murty mentioned that the WSIB uses a 4-to-1 ratio, I think, direct to indirect. That might vary between sectors. It might vary between companies. It might vary between the type of injuries that you're looking at. Ergonomic-related injuries, back injuries, for instance, are very costly. Every sector has its own unique issues, and today we're going to be dealing with the transportation sector. It was mentioned that transportation is quite high still, just under 3.5. You notice my other favorite, mining, is at 0.8. When I started 30 years ago, it was 12.8 per 100. 12.8. And I attribute training, technology, and the management system in terms of IRS. Those three particular things. In transportation, we've made exceptional advances in terms of where we were 20 years ago to where we are now. It's still high, but it's high in every jurisdiction in the world. And if we can crack this particular issue here in Ontario, it's going to help the rest of the world in terms of this very important area. We heard that the fatalities are going down, and that's great. We heard lost time injury rates are going down. Very proud of the latest 5 years. The government decided to invest in providing 200 new inspectors into the system. They did that based on a business case. I recall Chris Bentley, the minister of the day, decided, okay, now how much are you going to prevent by putting in more resources in this area? And we gave him a number, and we beat it. The fact that lost time injury rates fell that much was not just the enforcement, those 200 new inspectors, but certainly it was part of the game. Internal responsibility system, it's a management system that assigns roles and responsibilities, direct and indirect. It also has some clarity in terms of who does what, which is important. We're going to celebrate 30 years of this. And I would challenge you to find a better system in the world. There isn't, I know. We had the best in the world come to Toronto a couple of years ago, the International Association of Labor Inspectors. And it was the first time they ever came to North America, and we exchanged views with chief inspectors from various parts of the world. And they were absolutely astounded at our system. I think we should be proud of it. We should reinforce it. We should basically look at where we can strengthen it. But the basic premise of people with direct responsibility, having that responsibility covered in this little green book, the role of the enforcement agent, the Ministry of Labour, is not being part of the IRS. It's being a check on the system. We can never have enough inspectors. Never. And we shouldn't. The system has to depend on an internal system that works. If there is no internal system, then you're going to have actions no matter if you double, triple, or increase that number by 100-fold. The next big idea, I want to tell you, the IRS was the first big idea. And I've been at this for 30 years, and I've been looking for big ideas. This is the next one, healthy workplaces. The fact that there are three components, the fact that it's occupational health and safety, the physical side, the psychosocial side, and the health habits, the personal lifestyle stuff, the obesity stuff. We were talking about overweight people and the effects on accident rates and a whole range of different issues cannot be handled by conventional health and safety techniques. And the stress in the workplace side of things, violence in the workplace, that healthy workplace side, I think, is going to be part of the framework for looking at the research agenda on trying to reduce the MSDS numbers. If we look at, and unfortunately, the 30% of lost time injury rates hasn't fallen significantly. We're still looking for some better approaches. We know that the average cost of an LTI, the lost time injury rate, for general trucking is $42,693. We know that from the WSIB premium rate manual. It's got a wealth of information. If you don't know about it, make sure you get a link to it. It's got all kinds of interesting things, because you're going to have to make the business case in your workplaces. You're going to have to make sure that people know why you need to invest in safety and how much the return would be from that. The average cost, if you look at all of the various rate groups, THSAO rate groups, $32,000. You notice that general trucking has been coming down. 2008 is 3.39. That's a good trend, but we're going to have to make some major inroads in terms of what's the next big breakthrough. Some of the research that you heard today is good to look at. It should be figured into the training you provide people. It should be figured into the kind of procurement decisions that you make on the equipment that you buy. So on a national scale, if we want to save the WSIB some money, given that their revenues have gone down from their investments, well, here's a good place to go. If you look at the direct and indirect costs across the country, $30 billion, and if we take 30% of that as MSDSs, there's a lot of room for investment. Of course, all that will go to oh gosh. CRE-MSD. So CRE-MSD will get the lion's share of that $10 billion. And perhaps a few pennies will funnel over to Queens as well now that we know each other. It's not just research, though. It's certainly research needs to give us the grounding in terms of how do we make our decisions based on good science. But we need to look at research, training, regulatory, at the regulatory side of things. The way we regulate is by a risk assessment. So we look at the likelihood of accidents, injuries, incidents. We look at the consequence, multiply the two for risk factors. We figure out where the attention should be and how it should be regulated. And certainly if you look at the numbers here in MSD, it certainly there's a need for doing work in this area. On the firm level, and that's your level, if we look at the direct cost is $42,000, the indirect cost at $150,000, and obviously it could be more, it could be less. There are numbers from 2 to I think the highest I've seen is 6 factors between direct and indirect. You might take some of your accidents that happened, say a over the last 5 years and see what your numbers are in your firm. It'll probably surprise you. It'll also, when you're looking at indirect costs in terms of replacement costs, training costs for the new employee, the kind of fines that you might have if you're prosecuted, the kind of costs that you attract from an incident, and a good publication that I use in my class is WSIB, a booklet that says it's called Business Results Through Health and Safety. I recommend it to you, and I've got pamphlets here that you can go online and download the whole thing. It's a very useful workbook, and I would love the WSIB to actually update this thing because the lost time injury rates are the costs are much lower in this than they are today. The other thing I'd like to see is a case study of a ergonomics related incident, just to cost that out, because I think in a lot of cases people don't see the hard numbers, and we have to have that in order to make the right decisions. Another way of looking at things is profit margins. And if you look at selling cars or looking at selling goods, you have to look at what your profit margins are. In good times, when everything's hot, profit margins are high. And in bad times, profit margins are low. Sometimes people are selling at cost just to be able to keep the enterprise going. Is investment in occupational health and safety less or more important in bad times as in good? Well, if you look at just the numbers, the raw numbers, in order to make up for a profit margin of say 20%, which is in good times, and obviously the profit margins are even higher in, say, retail, but in your sector and mining, they're of that order. Look at that $150,000. What do you have to make? What do you have to sell? How much product do you have to move to be able to make up for that cost? It's staggering. And now, if the profit margin is even lower, I show you that, in fact, you've got to sell a lot more just to keep up. So there's the business case, making sure that you don't reduce the investment. In fact, you increase the investment. When the Ministry of Labour and the Ontario government was going through its downsizing back in the late 90s, our lost time injury rates just peaked, partly because people were distracted. We had lots of layoffs. We had lots of chaos, all of that kind of stuff. You got to make sure that people are mindful of occupational health and safety. You've got to make sure your investments don't shrink in these times. I mentioned to you this particular publication, and I've adapted it for a course that I give as well. Two last slides. Because of this conference, because of the phone call that John Bond made to me, I ended up on the agenda here. And lo and behold, one of my colleagues across the campus found out about this, and now we've connected. Dr. Stephenson is quite an expert in kinesiology, and hopefully at the next conference you'll be able to see the kind of work she does. She does a lot of military work, backpacks and that sort of thing, and these are personal lifting assistance devices. This is Star Trek kind of stuff. If you remember Matrix, the loading docks in Matrix, you know, maybe that's where we're going. But these are mechanical lifts that they have under their clothes. She's also working on a mover pack that enables carrying on your back rather than in front. That's it for me. Any questions? Hearing none? I know.
No questions about money?
Should I go back and ask the question about that?
Well, the question still stands. The question I had previously was about dollar figures. The question still stands and still hasn't been answered. When it comes to hard times, the first thing that goes away in any workplace is the dollar figure towards safety and or mechanisms, products, devices that need to be purchased to make it a safer workplace. What are we going to do in regards to that? I know in my business, that's the first that goes. My phone calls from clients reduce because the safety factor is the first thing to go away in order to make revenue stand better in business.
What you've got to do is make the business case. If you look at these numbers, and they'll be different for various sectors, if you happen to be in, say, for instance, infrastructure stuff, construction, there are different numbers than trucking. But if you look at the direct costs of one lost time injury multiplied by a factor, which the WSIB says is around 4, and as I said, it could be higher, 150,000. 150,000, and if you look at how that translates into the business of that firm, if you show them that in fact by cutting out safety training, by cutting out the kind of work that you want done, this is the kind of costs they're going to attract. So you pay me now or you pay me later. You obviously have to be able to make the persuasive argument based on logic and numbers. There's here we're getting into some classics. One of the things that we don't teach anymore at universities is rhetoric. Rhetoric was invented by a guy named Isosocrates. Before Socrates, there's a guy named Isosocrates. There were 3 components of rhetoric: logos, ethos, and pathos. Government people and a lot of people in the safety business are really good at the pathos and the ethos. What's the right thing to do? What's the ethical thing to do? Pathos, what's the human thing? You know, basically a lot of those WSIB ads relate to that. And then there's logos. What's the business case? What's the logic model? You need to use all 3 to make the persuasive argument. So get good at the numbers. You have to know, like a lot of people don't know about the average lost time injury cost. They don't know how it translates into how much more product we have to sell just to stay even if we had one. So I think that's your answer, that when you get out there to make the case, you've got to be armed with this logo stuff, as well as the ethos, as well as the pathos. Great. I'll see you out there in walking around, I'm sure, and you might have some other questions, and thank you very much.